special needs special needs education in both the US and the UK. It sounds from our prelim chat here that he has left that behind. He'll be able to clarify that. And he's now making his paying for his lunch by writing. God bless him. Uh, he's here to talk today about his current book, Black Stats Matter, which has received positive notices from all that have read it. I consider it one of the two most impactful books on the Negro Leagues of the past decade or so. He also was a member of SABR's Special Negro Leagues and Team Committee, which has finished its its work's not finished until we get the attention of Major League Baseball and others. But his particular, all three subcommittees are done, so he may want to talk a little bit about that. And finally, he's working on a new book on the Negro Leagues, and I'm not sure he's going to be able to talk about that, but we're all curious. You're on, Phil.
Thank you, Ted, for that very generous introduction. As Ted said, my name is Philip Lee. I was formerly worked in special needs education for 23 years, and I got hurt one too many times. And I withdrew from a job that I thought I would be doing until my retirement, at least, in some frustration. And my partner, God bless her, said, "You've always wanted to be a writer. Why don't you try doing some writing?" And the first thing that occurred to me was the Negro Leagues. My connection with the Negro Leagues goes back not nearly as far as some of the people who I see assembled in this room, but quite a way. When I was a boy growing up in high school, I really didn't enjoy my high school experience. I thought the teachers were stuffy and conservative. The curriculum was stuffy and conservative. I grew up in a town that happened to be almost exclusively white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I had no outside connection with different cultures, different ethnicities, different points of view, different ways of looking at the world. And I was very fortunate in that our otherwise conservative high school had a very enlightened librarian. And every year, the American Literary Association issued a list of the 100 most commonly banned books in high schools. And this chap got at least one copy of every one of those books every year and made sure that they were available in the library. I was very bored by the things that we were offered to read. Catcher in the Rye left me cold. Of Mice and Men left me cold at that time. I don't think, old enough to appreciate the depth that Steinbeck could bring. And even today, I consider that one of his more surface tales. And I was an avid reader, and I was looking for things to read. So I went into the library and I grabbed some of those banned books. And as I'm sure a lot of you will be aware, Black authors have been a routine target and are still today with Project 2025 and all the rest of it are still a routine target for book bans. And so my library brought me in touch. First, it was Langston Hughes. I opened up a book of Langston Hughes's poetry, and I will never forget the first words I read. "Dear landlord, my roof has sprung a leak. Don't you remember I told you about it way last week?" And that absolutely rocked me back on my heels, because poetry had always been taught to me as something abstract and loaded with metaphors and similes that often harkened back to previous centuries. And I didn't get a lot of emotional depth or a lot of directness from it. And here was a poet talking about right here, right now, today, poor people in distress, with direct, unambiguous, clear, concise language, and it just took my breath away. And so I dug, and I found Gene Toomer's Cane, and I found Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, which I immediately thought, why are they teaching us Of Mice and Men when they could be teaching us this? And then I discovered Richard Wright, and I started reading. I read Black Boy, I read Native Son, I read The Man Who Lived Underground. Native Son was the first book that absolutely took me out of my time and place to a different time and place. Um, I don't know if the word masterpiece necessarily, I mean, I think Wright is a master, but that book didn't impact me intellectually, which was a first for me. It impacted me emotionally. It just rippled through the core of my soul. And so I became very, very interested in Black culture. And in the place and the time where I grew up, there was no Black culture unless you happened to hear, say, a Stevie Wonder tune on the radio. There was nothing. There was literally nothing. I was taught nothing by or about Black people. Zero. No Black writers. I mean, there may have been a passing reference to George Washington Carver having invented peanut butter, or Frederick Douglass's name or W.E.B. Du Bois's name might have been dropped into a conversation. And I'm sure Martin Luther King was mentioned for, you know, 45 seconds in a history lecture, and that was it. And so, because music is my principal love, I started delving into Black music. And the first guy I discovered was Roy Ayers, who made an album called Change Up the Groove. And his vibraphone struck a real note on my skull. And it didn't take me long to get out of the pop side and discover Miles Davis and John Coltrane and Charles Mingus. My head was much more attuned to the 60s and early 70s at first. And then later, as I gained some maturity, I got more into Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, with the Hot Fives and Hot Sevens. And basically, for all that I wasn't paying attention in school, because I barely graduated from high school, I was paying deep attention to Black culture in the United States. And I had no one to talk to about it at all. I had no peers for this conversation. I didn't know any Black people. I don't think I had ever met any Black people, except perhaps to shake someone's hand, maybe when I was young. And I was sort of inventing my own path. And since I love the sport of baseball, since my grandfather, who I spoke about at the Hall of Fame at length, had inculcated a love of baseball into my bones, I looked at some of the great Black superstars who I knew even then had experienced some serious, serious prejudice. I knew about some of the stuff that Dick Allen had gone through. I knew about some of the stuff that Eddie Murray's younger brother had gone through just from my reading about baseball. And I read in a book, Minneapolis Public Library, early 1990s, that Larry Doby had hit a home run in his final Negro Leagues at bat on the 4th of July, 1947. And I thought, what are the Negro Leagues? I'd never heard of them. They weren't on the sportscasts that I listened to. They weren't in the books that I read at that time. The revolution, not just in history, but in analysis, had not really gained traction yet. The very early pioneers were just digging in. I mean, I didn't know about Todd Peterson, for example. I didn't know about any of this. I built the Bill James. I became obsessed with at an early age, but he wasn't onto it yet. But I started digging for information on the Negro Leagues, and by the mid 1990s, I had a pretty good pile of information about Larry Doby that I'd never seen published anywhere outside of old crumbling newspapers or microfiche. I did some education. I ended up with 4 university degrees because I just didn't know what else to do, to be honest. And I went into special needs education. And these topics went to the back burner as far as writing was concerned. But I certainly continued my reading. And when I got hurt, for the last of far too many times and withdrew from education, my partner said, why don't you try writing a book? And the first thing I thought of was a biography of Larry Doby. I picked up all the materials that I had piled up on him, and I realized that I didn't have his essence, his spirit as a human being. I had a lot of numbers because the analytical side of baseball has always interested me. I had a lot of raw data on him, but not who he was. And so I thought, okay, that's not going to work. Why don't I expand my scope to the Negro Leagues as a broader topic? And the more that I read and studied, the more I came to the firm opinion that, to quote the title of my book, Black Stats Matter, that the statistics that Negro Leaguers had compiled, particularly in the what I call the Rube Foster era, although I realize he died in 26, but I mean, he started that process. The 1920 to 48 era, that those statistics could and should stand with any statistics from what I realized were the Caucasian leagues prior to Jackie. Um, it's great looking at Babe Ruth's 690 slugging and being in awe of that, but then you got to realize he wasn't facing Cyclone Williams. He was facing half or two-thirds of the available top talent around. And a quote from Satchel Paige really stuck with me, which was, I could have shaved a few points off those big fat lifetime averages. I thought, well, you certainly could have. So I started writing on a broader topic, which was putting together um, an argument that Negro League numbers were equivalent to Major League numbers. I'd seen the opinion expressed, but I'd seen the contrary opinion expressed much more frequently, particularly on high-level discussions on baseball in books and on the internet, that the Negro Leagues were the equivalent of AAA or even AA ball or Japanese baseball or sometimes Mexican baseball was a comparison that I saw. And I knew that couldn't be right because if you looked at the times when Negro Leaguers played white players, they did just fine. And you had comments from people like Carl Hubble, people like Dizzy Dean, people like Walter Johnson, that they were looking at players who were 100% their equals in every respect, if not their superiors. Um, you know, uh, Hubble and Johnson made it very clear that they thought Josh Gibson was better than any catcher, not just in the majors at that time, but any catcher who'd ever played. And so I thought to myself, okay, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to prove it. And I spent about half a year casting around for ways to prove it, and then about another 2.5 years researching it. A lot of those numbers weren't compiled into one place, especially then. Um, the people at Seamheads, Kevin Johnson was so helpful to me in terms of finding, things like double plays per 9 innings, stuff that just wasn't out in the public domain, especially then. And when the book was almost done, Major League Baseball made its announcement that they were going to count the Negro Leagues as major leagues. I didn't know precisely what that meant in terms of statistical integration or what it would mean in terms of statistical integration, but I almost abandoned the book until I started reading the backlash, the contrary opinions that were flooding the net saying, this is a bunch of nonsense. Black players weren't the equal of white players. I read comments saying things like, anybody with a brain, anybody who's looked at the issue knows for a fact that black players weren't the equal of white players. I'm thinking, what sort of antediluvian racist garbage is this? So that made me more determined to finish the book. I set up the most rigorous proofs I could. I analyzed them in the most rigorous way I could, and I found nothing at all to contradict the notion that Negro Leaguers were every bit as good as Major Leaguers in every respect. The five tools, offense and defense, fielding, anything you want to look at. In fact, in some respects, they were superior to the Major Leaguers, particularly in terms of Negro League teams' ability to turn the double play. The only marker that I could find against them in dozens and dozens of analytical tests were that the average Negro Leagues player was shorter than the average Major Leagues player. And to me, that's not much of a marker when all formal analytical indicators all agreed that there was equality there. So I went ahead, I published the book, and I was very honored to find out recently that the president of SABR read the book and changed his mind about all of these subjects, he told me, at least in part because of my book. On the strength of the book, I was invited to join SABR's Special Negro Leagues Teams Committee. We looked at some of those same issues, but particularly teams that were outside that 1920 to 1948 organized frame. The independent teams that operated during that time, independent teams that operated prior to 1920, and the Negro American League, which continued its function until 1962. And the conclusion that my subcommittee reached was that the 1949 and 50 Negro American League should absolutely be classed as major leagues, and their statistics should be incorporated into the major league database. And there's quite a bit of writing by our subcommittee, which includes quite a bit of my writing on the net, readily available to find if you want to see how we reached those conclusions. But I can tell you that we applied a lot of rigor to it. We questioned our own conclusions as rigorously as we could. We answered any attack that we could think of that might be leveled against the observations that we were making and the research that we were doing, tried to answer them all, and nothing shook our belief. It's my personal belief that the two independent teams that were, yes, thank you, Ted. It was my personal opinion that the two independent teams that were operating at that time, also the Black Yankees and the Homestead Grays, particularly the Grays, probably were also operating at a major league level, but the problem there structurally was that they were mostly playing minor league teams. And there's only a handful of games that could be found where they are competing against major league competition. For that reason, particularly in the case of the Grays, we sort of reluctantly decided that we could not accord them major league status, although we did leave the door open to future discussion and debate. Past 1950, it was our feeling, and I think my analysis had something to do with this conclusion, that the quality level really fell off. The lead structure disintegrated badly. There were too many defections, primarily not to the white major leagues, but to the minor leagues, that the viability of the leagues collapsed as a true competitive structure. But the important conclusion that we reached that we're hoping influences Baseball Reference and eventually Major League Baseball itself was that 1948 cutoff, it was reached with using some reasonably logical parameters. The end of 1948, the Negro National League collapsed. The end of 1948, the Negro World Series in the form that is accepted that it existed had stopped. So that was regarded as the cutoff, and we found that cutoff was more or less arbitrary, and that 1950 is the true date. And that has some very interesting repercussions on baseball history. For example, if anyone was in any doubt that Willie Mays was the greatest all-around player of all time, you throw in 1949 and 1950 for the Black Barons, and that doubt is going to be strongly dissipated because those are strong batting years and strong offensive years, and also very strong defensive years from Willie, proving that he was ready. He was ready. He was a little shaky at 18, but by 1920, he was ready. It's not a mistake that he batted .477 at Minneapolis when he was given his shot at the minor leagues. He was ready not just to play, but to dominate. And it gives Junior Gilliam a couple of extra years, which puts him into definite contention for the greatest utility player of all time. We could not find we could not find numbers for Buck Leonard because I'd love to have seen his record extended. Because Buck is, of all the people who just aren't talked about enough in terms of modern commentary, Buck was an inner circle monster, 1033 career OPS, absolutely the Lou Gehrig of the Negro Leagues, as far as I see it, to Josh Gibson's Babe Ruth. And the new book I'm working on is focused on the post 1948 Negro Leagues. I will admit to this august company that when I was writing my pieces for the subcommittee, I did have a book in mind. I made those pieces more or less modular and convertible to being strung into a longer narrative. My research for the new book is half or more than half done. The writing is probably more than half done. Obviously, I'll let you all know when it's ready. Um, and that's where I'm coming from. That's where Black Stats Matter came from. My new book, which is a strategy guide to the game Catan, or which might be more familiar to some of you as Settlers of Catan, the world's most popular board game outside of the big four, chess, checkers, backgammon, and Go. Has just been published by McFarlane a few weeks ago. It's my understanding the first people have gotten their copies of that. That's a little bit off topic. I'm just letting you know what I'm working on. I've got two more books in parallel besides the Negro Leagues book that are sort of off topic, although one of them is on the fellow I spoke on at the Hall of Fame, Woody Peterson. My grandfather was a very interesting guy and very ahead of his time in terms of the way he viewed race. Um, I am not sure that he saw race at all. I spent a lot of time around that man, and he lived in a place with very mixed ethnicity, and I never saw any indication from him that he saw race in any sense. And now that I've got his personal papers, I found a mountain of evidence to that effect, that he reached out into Black communities in Chicago with numerous charitable endeavors. He reached into Black communities in Georgia with Jimmy Carter's Habitat for Humanity and helped build at least 37 homes in Georgia in Black neighborhoods. All of that is just coming together now. Um, what I'd like to do principally with this time is have an open dialogue with the people here, because there are some brains here I know and respect. There are some other people I'm sure once I make their acquaintance, I will have the respect for them as well. I'd like to answer any questions you might have and maybe propound a little bit on what I've written in the book. But I'll leave the steering of the talk up to you.
Oh, well, thanks, Phil. I'm going to have to rely on Tom here because already I'm having a technological challenge in the chat room. I don't think I'm reaching everyone. With such a small audience, Tom, could we unmute everybody and maybe then you or you and me could sort of control the flow? Is that possible?
Yes, everyone's unmuted. Welcome again, everybody. Feel free to turn your cameras on and be part of this. Ted, for your posting purposes, where you see host and panelists, if you click on that, there should be a drop-down menu that then will say everyone. So you can try to remedy that and send future stuff to everybody.
And I don't see that drop down. I usually do. I don't now.
Well, there you go. So we'll post things otherwise on behalf of Ted and why don't you all jump in? Please feel free to turn unmute yourselves and put your camera on and let's have a great chat.
As long as nobody's jumping up, I'm going to just your new book. Obviously, it probably excites us all. Are you going to cover the period through 1962?
To the extent that I can, yes. A lot of you will know that House Sports Bureau issued statistical summaries for Negro American League play. They were actually the NAL's official statistician from 1944 through 1950, although the stats they compiled prior to 1948 were unfortunately incomplete in a lot of the extended statistical categories that we'd like to see today. They weren't covering walks very well, for example, and that's pretty basic to understanding and being able to analyze offense. But I'm convinced. I spent last year conducting. Go ahead. I spent last year conducting correspondence with 428 different American data repositories. That is to say, libraries, museums, state and national archives, extant Black newspapers, basically anyone I could think of and could locate that might have these lost House summaries. Because right now, We've got them for 40, we've got them for 49 and 50. Although the one from 49 was in pretty bad shape. We've got them for 52, 53, 54, and we've got one for 58, and that's it. So 51 is a big glaring gap. 55, 56, 57 is a big glaring gap, and it's my personal opinion that Howe did not produce these statistical summaries past 1958. Now, I have been in communication with Jay Vershbow, Howe Sports Data's former general manager, and he says their archives were scattered to the wind, so that there is no longer a central repository of their information, despite their status as the official AL statistician for such a long period of time. He confirms to me that it's possible that there were certain years when Howe didn't go forward. My personal theory about 1951 is that the implosion of the Negro American League caused sufficient confusion that probably Howe didn't get the stats to compile. That is my personal opinion. I have a certain amount of research to back that up. It's harder to say with 55, 56, 57, but I'm convinced they don't exist anymore. One of those, the search was not fruitless. First of all, as any researcher will tell you, and there's a lot of researchers in this room, a negative result is still a result. The fact is that I combed all the places where this stuff might be that I could possibly think of and chased every lead that they in turn extended to me and came up dry. That indicates to me this information is to a 95+% certainty lost forever, particularly in the absence of a repository for Howe's information. Number two, I discovered improved copies of several of these teletypes. One of the teletypes was badly damaged by transmission error, and quite a few player records on the first page were lost. I found a clean copy, which just immediately brings information back. These Howe teletypes are unusually important to the analysis of post-1948 Negro Leagues because of the Jackie Robinson effect, because black newspapers, black sports writers largely deserted the Negro Leagues in favor of the major leagues. Once Jackie was in the National League and Larry was in the American League, there was something else to cover that for a lot of readers was way more interesting than a steadily diminishing Negro American League, diminishing in terms of attendance, diminishing in terms of economics, diminishing in terms of player base. And so the types of statistical reconstructions that SEAM has done, which are done through box scores, they can't apply. The box scores don't exist. Right. You're lucky if you get a Thursday game reported on a Sunday. We're talking about well under a quarter of all games played being recorded. And even there, we're talking about lack of data, like, for example, earned runs don't often appear. You get total runs, but not earned runs. And ERA is a very basic comparison component. You generally, sometimes you're lacking innings pitched and or hits, which means you can't do WHIP, which is another basic comparator that can't be employed. So these Howe statistical summaries become very important. And for those online, and there have been a few who have questioned their validity, not sure why they don't question their validity in terms of the stats they kept for the American League starting in 1912. Sorry, I didn't catch that. There was a lot of feedback on that comment. Is that you, Jorge?
Yes, I have power off. I'm gonna take it off. Sorry.
Okay. No problem, Jorge. So it is true that we don't possess the Howe originals. What we possess is teletypes.
Hola, mi amor.
We possess stuff from the back end of transmissions. That leaves several possibilities for error. One is in the transmission itself. And I've already indicated one of those teletypes had some bad distortion in it before I found a clean copy. Another is in the compilation, obviously, and digging has found a lot of errors in Major League compilation, so it should be no surprise that there should be some errors in Negro League compilation, particularly since Negro League teams couldn't afford to keep official scores. That was just an extra job for someone on that team. They didn't have someone to keep track of the stats. It's hard to put yourself back in that time period and realize that they were operating under enormous economic constraints. that didn't apply to the major leagues. And that was not a position that they could particularly fill. It's also not a guy they could transport from place to place with their limited vehicle usage to get from game to game. There were a lot of obstacles to keeping that kind of data. But the managers did submit to Howe redistributed to newspapers. And that's where we get a possibility to check for errors. Because black newspapers of the time do contain statistical summaries of varying length, and they're very problematic to sort through. Different newspapers would publish them on different dates. So you'd get a set of stats, let's say in week 1, and week 2, you'd get another newspaper reporting that same set of stats while a parallel newspaper was reporting a new set of stats or even an older set of stats. So it's very difficult to know where you are in the progression. They don't cover all players. Newspapers didn't necessarily run them in their entirety. They would truncate them, sometimes at the end of, for example, hitters who were hitting 300 or better. Sometimes they would truncate the columns that they ran, the columns of information, which means you might get runs allowed by pitchers, but not innings pitched, for example, which makes the runs allowed not very helpful, to say the least. But by taking a lot of time, and I've put a lot of time into this, and I'm going to put a lot more time into this, by taking a lot of time and combing through this stuff line by line, newspaper by newspaper, player by player, you can error check the Howe teletypes. And I've developed some methods to do that. And that's what I'm in process of doing now. And for seasons where we don't have the teletypes, particularly 51, where there was still some reporting going on, you can use that raw data to compile records. Scott Simkus did that to an extent in Outsider Baseball in 2011. So a lot of you have probably seen that article where he reconstructs, I think it's maybe about 30 player records from the 1951 Negro American League. I've got over 120 reconstructed now, and to a much greater degree of detail than Scott had. And I've been in correspondence with Scott to check his methodology and see if there's anything I'm missing, and also to see if he has any data that I can use, to be honest. But my reconstructions also are reaching for just names. You'll all be familiar with Larry Lester's fabulous Negro Leagues books. They don't, particularly volume 2 doesn't tend to break down by year, but it does give you a starting point, who played for where. And I've got a list, last time I checked it, it was over 20 pages long, of corrections for Larry's volume 3 when he issues that, because I talk to Larry all the time. And so that's an additional fruit that this research is bearing, is being able to correct given names, surnames, nicknames, roster slots, positions played, and restore these people to a place in history from which they've been lost. Because particularly this post-1948 generation has just been lost to history. They've been swept under history's carpet. And the big purport of my book is not only to restore some stats, but to restore names, to put some names to who are these people who were laboring on in the post-1948 Negro Leagues. And I'm making good progress, but I've got a lot of way to go. My hope is by the end of 2025 that this work will all be complete. And I've already got well over a year invested into it. So it's a good chunk of work.
Because of the silence, I'm going to jump in again. On that topic, Phil, one of the better recommendations or findings of that committee you served on was the designation of Negro Leagues post-1950 as an official minor league.
That's what we want.
Your book, of course, will go a long way towards that. Any other ideas you have of convincing the people who make such decisions, not that we need their imprimatur, but how would you suggest going about selling the Negro American League through the 50s as a official AA or AAA minor league?
My personal view of that is that 51 to 54 should probably count at about AAA level. And that once you get to 55 and later, let's face it, it doesn't take a huge amount of effort to get a league classified as a minor league. If you look around at some of the leagues that are called minor leagues, there's There's not a lot to them sometimes. But even to get Major League Baseball or Baseball Reference as a start, and I've been in contact with Adam Darowski about this, and I think he's open to it. To get him to regard the 1949 and 50 Negro American League as major leagues, that has to come first, I think, because then you create the timeline bridge between the current cutoff, which is 48, and the area in which we think minor leagues ought to start, which is 51. You create a bridge there. That's the first thing I think, and we put out a lot of analysis on why we think the 49 and 50 Negro American League should be counted as major leagues. And my book, I mean, the whole purport of my book, I spent over 150 pages saying why I think the Negro League stats should be counted as major leagues. And I'm glad Major League Baseball has agreed. If I had 0.00001% to do with that, I'm extremely gratified, because that I have been of that opinion for decades, that those stats should be counted officially. And as far as the minor league stats, there's so many. First of all, it's the rosters. There's so many names on those teams of people who exchanged between the Negro American League and the white minors. But we're still almost the almost exclusively white minors, although they were integrating increasingly. That clearly there's a base of players there who could prove they could play in the minors. So that's one point in their favor. Secondly, as I said, it doesn't take a brain surgery level of effort to get a league designated as a minor league. There you have these advocacy groups in places like Alaska, and I'm not knocking them. I would do the same, who are pushing for their local teams or teams to be granted minor league status so that their names aren't lost, so that they remain part of this history, this continuity that extends back to 1871 with the foundation of the National Association of Organized Baseball. I think it can be done. I think it might take more special Negro Leagues and Teams Committee meetings to get it done. I think we might have to look for concrete proofs or demonstrations the way we did for 49 and 50. I'm confident, though, that I think it's doable. I think all of this is doable.
With that, I'll ask a question. Phil, you talk about someone by the name of Josh Gibson in your book.
I've heard of him vaguely, yeah.
That's consequence to some of us on this call in particular. May I ask you to reflect a little bit more about Josh in light of your detailed work?
Absolutely. Josh holds several unique distinctions in the history of organized baseball, all of which rely implicitly on accepting that Negro League stats are major league stats. But I don't think anybody in this room is going to argue against that proposition. First of all, he's clearly the greatest catcher in the history of organized baseball, and by a long, long measure. If you look at the people who are generally talked about at the top, Berra and Bench are the ones who always get mentioned by the paparazzi, although I personally think Campanella needs to be in that conversation as well, once you tack on his Negro Leagues experience, and also given the absurd quality of his defense, because I regard him as comfortably the greatest defensive catcher of all time, Campanella. Plus, he set power hitting records at catcher. So you compare Gibson as a hitter to Berra or Bench or Campanella, he's way past them. Gibson had 3 seasons out of 17 with an OPS under 900. That's absurd. Okay, from the catcher's slot, there's no comparison to that. Piazza is leagues behind him as a hitter, and Piazza is clearly the best hitting major league catcher of all time. You go to the heavy OBP guys like Mickey Cochrane, Gabby Hartnett, the guys who relied more on getting on base, same deal. Josh got on base more than them because he had a great eye and he walked a lot. He had a tremendous on base percentage. You look at defense, it's my interpretation of the evidence that Gibson was not an elite defensive catcher like Campanella, Bismacki, Ivan Rodriguez, people like that. I don't think he was quite on that level. He clearly had a superior throwing arm. He was apparently weak on pop flies. Something about looking up like that made him dizzy. And so he wasn't necessarily the best at corralling pop flies behind the plate. He was clearly the best person in the Negro Leagues ever at blocking the plate. absolutely just a slab of granite at the plate. Hooks Tinker said of him that it was like running into sheet metal when you hit him in a collision at the plate. Um, uh, Given that combination, if he had even average defense, and I think it's clear he had above average defense, if he had even average defense, putting that level of offense together with average defense makes him easily and by far the greatest catcher of all time. But I think he actually enjoys above average defense. Second place that he holds in baseball history is the greatest right-handed hitter of all time. And again, by a huge, huge measure. When you talk about the greatest hitters of all time, you're talking about an elite circle of four, as far as I can break it down. You're talking about Ted Williams, you're talking about Babe Ruth, you're talking about Barry Bonds with all the caveats and asterisks that come with him, and you're talking about Josh. And Josh is the only right-hander in that group. And the people who are close to him, Hank Greenberg, Jimmy Fox, maybe a young Albert Pujols, maybe a young Frank Thomas, are not that close to him. So again, give him that niche in baseball history, greatest right-handed hitter ever. So what have we got so far? Greatest catcher, greatest right-handed hitter. You want to talk about greatest player, which is a bold statement. In my book, I split that into three. I said the best baseball player, as a generic term, was Babe Ruth, because you take his hitting, you take his pitching, and you take his postseason performance, which was the best by any player ever, if you combine the hitting and pitching. He's got to be the best baseball player ever. Best position player I named is Gibson, because the only person in baseball history who dominated their position the way Gibson did was Honus Wagner at shortstop. And Honus had better defense than Josh, but Josh could run rings around Honus on the bases. Josh was a much, much greater hitter than Honus. Leagues better. So I regard him as the best position player, and then the best all-around player I nominated is Willie Mays, because he's the one guy in all of baseball history you can look at his stat line and he has no weakness. What's his weakness? He didn't strike out a lot. He didn't hit into a lot of double plays. He was devastating on the base paths. He had medium range power, lots of doubles and triples. He had basically Ruthian home run power. He could hit for average. Where's the guy's weakness? He doesn't have one. Then put that together with him being easily one of the top 5 defensive center fielders of all time, and center fielder being arguably the key defensive position on the field other than shortstop. I'd give that to Mays. So I would name Gibson as one of the 3 greatest players who ever played baseball. So greatest catcher, greatest right-handed hitter, one of the 3 greatest players. That's where I personally put Gibson in my pantheon. Oh, and let's give him one more. He was, you have to look at the Negro or his sojourn in the 1940 and 41 Mexican leagues to get to this result, which I do, because one of the things I advocated for in not my committee, but Kevin Johnson's subcommittee, was that the 1940 and 41 Mexican leagues be counted as Negro Leagues, and I gave a variety of reasons for that. But if you include his Mexican Leagues experience, Josh won pennants 9 straight years with his teams. You're going to have a very hard time replicating that in baseball history. There's a handful of people who, Yogi Berra, Mickey Mantle, you're generally talking the Yankees. There's a handful of people on that level. So in terms of bringing his team to winning results, maybe you could give him a 4th slot. So Gibson ranks very, very high for me. And that's one of the reasons I was really honored to be asked to speak here, because Sean is on the panel. And I can't, and my book is, I got Josh on the cover, man. My book is largely a love letter to Josh Gibson. I've got a chapter in there called Gibson versus Ruth's Record, just addressing the idea that Ruth is such a mythological figure, not just in baseball history, but in American history. Can American society accept Josh Gibson's rightful place in the baseball pantheon? So yeah, nothing but glowing admiration and respect. An inner circle giant.
Thank you, Phil. And we've recorded this. We're going to put this all over the internet.
You please feel free. I make no secret of my opinions on Mr. Gibson.
Thank you. Back to you, Ted.
Okay. I have a question for Doug Martin. Could you introduce yourself? I see you're not muted. I don't know you, and I'd like to. Doug? Okay. I guess we'll skip Doug for a while. Any other questions? I don't want to dominate here. Paul, Chris?
Yeah, I have a question. Hi Phil, how's it going? Last time I
Nice to
seen you
meet you,
was in
sir.
Cooperstown. Yes, sir. Um,
Did
so
we
with
speak?
all of
Did we speak at the Malloy conference, Paul?
yes, yep, we sure did.
Where did we speak?
We were at that
That
the
adjunct building?
Yeah.
what was that?
Yes.
At that adjunct building?
Yes, yep.
Can you please show
And
your face? Because I don't remember you by name, but your voice
okay,
is familiar to me.
let's see here. How do I I'm on my phone actually. I usually do my
Oh,
laptop, but I had
Oh,
to set up my new internet today.
I
So
no, I actually do think I remember. I do
Oh,
think I remember who you are. Please go ahead with your question.
um so was there any baseball documentaries about the Negro League that you admired during your research, like Baby the Ball is White, Kings of the Hill, or anything like that?
You mean specifically video?
Yeah.
I found Ken Burns's stuff useful.
Okay.
I found for the most part it was on a bit too much of a surface level for the kind of digging I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the problem with constructing my book was that stuff didn't exist. A lot of my book is a reference book.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it's a
Okay.
reference book is because I wanted a reference book like that. So I had to create one for myself, and to create one myself, I had to do the digging. There were certain books that were incredibly important to me.
Mm-hmm.
Larry Lester's work was absolutely key to me. Only the Ball Was White was a very important book to me.
Yeah.
Uh, a lot of the interview books were important to me just because it gave me a sense of the flavor. I can
Mm-hmm.
tell you one specific item, and obviously I was looking at a lot of real-time video, like for example, the Ray Al Campanis's racist meltdown.
Okay.
Yeah, I looked at a lot of stuff like that just because I actually transcribed it. I transcribed Bob Costas speaking against Negro League statistical integration on Bill Maher's show. Because I have a lot of respect for Bob Costas, and
Yeah.
I know that he's well into Negro Leagues history and does a lot of reading in that area. And he was just saying it can't be true because. So I spent a few pages just kind of rebutting that argument. But there's one piece of video I can say that I absolutely loathe, and that was Bingo Long.
Okay.
It's it. If Larry Doby did an oral interview with Faye Vincent in which he talks about Bingo Long, and he was saying it's like Amos and Andy. It's like Step and Fetch It. It gives completely the wrong image of the Negro Leagues.
Right.
That it was all clowning, and it wasn't
Right.
clowning. Professional baseball.
Yeah.
These guys were playing sometimes 2 games a day, sometimes 3 games on Sundays. They were traveling all night in their car. They were a lot of times having to eat in their cars because they couldn't go into the places where they were getting their food. Yeah.
Mhm.
And they were
Yeah.
playing, the cars were their bedrooms, their changing areas, their equipment storage lockers, their sleep was ragged. And they still accomplished what they did. And Bingo Long made them look like clowns.
Yeah.
And I really, that film left a bad taste in my mouth. And in the book, I compare that film to, I say that don't let Bingo Long convince you, and the names like the Indianapolis Clowns convince you that they were clowns. Look at the Globetrotters. And I talk a little bit
Right.
about Harlem Globetrotters and about like when Wilt the Stilt played for the Globetrotters, and you know that they're, for all that they clown around, they could play. And they crush foreign national teams. They crush Olympic squads because they're just that good. But people look at them like they're clowns, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, and since I'm guessing, since Bingo Long, other than maybe that film 42, which I thought was pretty bad, or some other visual representations, I'm guessing Bingo Long might be a lot of fans' only visual representation of anything that went on in black baseball. And I think that's really a shame. I wish somebody
Yeah.
would make a real movie, an honest movie about it. I hope that addresses your question.
Yeah, absolutely. It does. There is a video of a documentary. James Earl Jones actually narrates it. It's called Life in the Negro Leagues. The sun was always shining someplace.
Yes.
That is a really, if you haven't seen that,
I haven't, and I'm
think
on it.
Yeah, it's really good. It's about an hour long. Judy Johnson, Dave Malarcher, and a bunch of others are in the video talking about the Negro Leagues. It's pretty dope.
Sounds okay to me.
All right, Mr. Lee.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for
Yes,
a good question. Happy to take any other questions. Otherwise, I can talk a little bit more about the book, whatever suits you guys. In fact, let me mention something about the book. If there's one thing on the book that I wish people would pick up on other than the core argument, that I wish would enter into the mainstream of discussion, it's that Major League Baseball absolutely lied to Congress and presented forged documents to Congress in 1951 to disguise, in part, their disgusting attitudes about black ball players. And I've got a section in the book called Major League Baseball versus the Truth, where, at least to my satisfaction, and I think to the satisfaction of other people, Rob Neyer, I think, was convinced by this, that Major League Baseball absolutely just lied bluntly to Congress. And the only reason they got away with it was that they were such a trusted institution. You know, it's kind of the same way that Kim Philby and that lot got away with spying in Britain. Well, they're one of us. You know, they're good old boys. They're part of the background. They're part of the fabric of American life. They wouldn't lie to Congress, and they did. Especially Larry McPhail lied at length to Congress. And I wish that would become known, because I know for a fact I discovered it. I was looking at the transcripts of the congressional hearings as one of more than 1,000 pieces of primary evidence I looked at for the book. And I just kept thinking to myself, there's something wrong, there's something wrong, there's something wrong. And my partner tells me, I don't remember this consciously, that I sat up in bed at 2 a.m. one morning and said, there's two documents. And she said, huh, what? And I ran into this room, my office, and just kept typing until through the end of the next day, because I realized that they made stuff up. They cut up the original McPhail report into pieces, pasted it back together, and foisted that sham on Congress. And histories of baseball quote the sham documents all the time. So I'm hoping that gets out there a little bit.
Well, I got a very self-serving question that I don't.
We got like 2 more minutes, Ted.
Okay, that I don't know that you're going to be able to answer right now, but we can communicate. You do a marvelous job with Campanella, Easter, Irvin, and Doby, selling those folks. Easter in particular, because he's not in the hall.
He needs to be in the hall.
I know, I hear you. Can you give me some advice on how Phil Lee would spin Rap Dixon?
Oh, Rap Dixon. I'm probably the wrong person to ask that question, because I'm a small hall kind of guy. Most books on the Negro Leagues advocate 20 players, 50 players for the Hall of Fame, and my original version of the book advocated 3. And when Minnie Minoso and Buck O'Neill got selected, it came down to 1, which was Luke Easter. If I was going to spin Rap Dixon, I would spin Rap Dixon as an all-star, one of many all-star caliber players whose name should roll off the lips of any modern fan in the same way that, say, Ozzie Smith's does, or Mike Schmidt's does, or he's one of those guys who should just be in the conversation and isn't. But there's a lot of Negro Leaguers like that. How many average fans have heard of John Henry Lloyd? You know, and John Henry Lloyd is the one guy who I think could knock Honus Wagner off the perch as the greatest shortstop who ever lived. The only guy. And how many people have even heard of him? I think Rap Dixon falls into that category for me. And if I was going to spin him, I would say do some reading. Pick up a book. You know, this is history. This is the history not just of baseball, but of the fabric of American society. And people like Rap are lost in this haze of racist tropes and press indifference and historical indifference and teachers' indifference. And he should be in the common discourse. Absolutely. That's how I would spin Rap Dixon. That's how I would spin a lot of guys, to be honest. So I hope that's not too generic an answer, but that is how I would answer the question.
Perfect. Well, Sean, put a wrap on this with your sound on.
Thanks, Phil. Great job, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As you know, our next series is October 26th, and it's the home runs on Josh Gibson by Alan Cohen. That'll be our next speaker. So hopefully you guys can join us in October. So if
Can
that's
I get on the invitation list, please? Because I'll attend these regularly.
Sure,
Fantastic.
sure. So Phil, won't you stay on while everybody jump off? Me, you, and Tom will stay on for a close up. But again, I want to thank everybody. Everybody have a good weekend. Enjoy your weekend, and hopefully we'll see everybody next month. 2 months.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to present your group. It's a genuine honor.
Thank you.
All right, Sean 06. Take care. Everybody
06,
have a good
brother.
one. Yes, sir.
Hey, Paul.
All right, let me stop the recording.